LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the June 21st edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there, including my father. If my father happens to be watching, check your voicemail. I left you a voicemail message. Thanks for joining me. This week I picked out the top 10 best, most newsworthy clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be a really educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all tonight. Down in the video description, I put a link to the clip list that I'm using, my notes. You can follow along with my notes if you're interested, of the 10 clips, those top 10 clips, and the source of all the clips also down in the video description. My topic this week actually covers like 4 different areas, but I decided to categorize them all under the topic Trump fails, from the failure of his rally in Tulsa last night, which gets a lot of coverage in the news summaries and in a couple of the newsmaker clips. The failure at the Supreme Court on DACA, which I will discuss, and I will commit some legal analysis since I am a lawyer and I have some background in constitutional law. I will talk about the DACA decision and a little bit maybe about the LGBTQ discrimination decision. Also, Trump has a big failure on his response to the nationwide protests against police misconduct, which I'll be covering. Not as much as I've covered the last couple weeks, but still an issue. And then, of course, COVID-19. Trump has a huge failure in his mishandling of the COVID-19 crisis. I think that is coming more and more back into the news. I'm wearing pandemic peach this week because I think the pandemic is unfortunately going to be an increasing story again as some of our attention has moved away from that. And so, anyway, I'm going to discuss all those failures of Trump in this video. But first, instead of a political comedy clip, I want to show you this still image I took from Fox News yesterday. Let me click on that here. If you follow me on Twitter or Facebook, you already saw this, and you can follow me on Twitter or Facebook at links I've also put down in the video description. But this is Fox News' coverage of last night's Tulsa rally, getting photobombed by this Trump 2020 fuck your feelings guy, which I thought was an interesting representation of the mindset at the Trump crowd at the rally last night. But actually, now I want to move on to the actual news clips, the news summaries, and the newsmaker clips. Like I said, cover those 4 main areas of Trump fails. And I'm going to start with the NBC News Meet the Press news summary, which, as usual, was the longest and best news summary. Chuck Todd, you'll see here, talks about the president politicizing the pandemic, and last night talking about the much smaller crowd, that the event in Tulsa last night with Trump might have actually been a super spreader event, and then actually talking about a lot of the failures of Trump that I just talked about. Then going to the pre-recorded package, it's a little over 4 minutes that I will talk about with you after we watch it together over here.
Good Sunday morning and a happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. Presidential politics, demonstrations, and a partisan pandemic all came together last night in Tulsa, Oklahoma. President Trump has refused to wear a mask, and his supporters have followed suit, dismissing mask wearing as some liberal virtue signaling and somehow as nothing more than signaling opposition to the president. Last night, a president frustrated by a virus that has kept him off the campaign trail finally got to do what he loves best about his job, thrill an adoring crowd of loyal supporters. Though the crowd was much smaller than anticipated and plans for an overflow area were scrapped. He did it in a Tulsa arena with mostly non-mask wearing partisans. This, as experts fear the indoor rally could be a super spreader event. This, as the United States, Oklahoma, and Tulsa specifically are all seeing spikes in COVID-19 cases. This, as we're still experiencing a 9/11-like loss of life every 4 to 5 days. The rally came at the end of a rough week for the president, sinking poll numbers, the John Bolton book, 2 Supreme Court decisions that didn't go his way, all on top of swiftly changing public attitudes that have put Mr. Trump on the wrong side of the culture wars that he's always leveraged in the past to his advantage.
I said hundreds of thousands of lives. We don't ever get even a mention.
President Trump at his first campaign rally since the pandemic began.
When you do testing to that extent, you're going to find more people. You're going to find more cases. So I said to my people, slow the testing down, please.
With 26 states recording at least a 20% spike in new coronavirus cases over the last 2 weeks, Oklahoma among them, the president went maskless, mocking COVID-19 with racist language.
I can name Kung Flu.
Insisting on the rally despite warnings from his own coronavirus task force.
I will take a chance that I get that virus, but I'm not going to get that virus.
President Trump spent nearly 2 hours on the attack.
The unhinged left-wing mob is trying to vandalize our history, desecrate our monuments, our beautiful monuments.
Black Lives Matter!
And blame protesters and the media for the smaller than expected crowd. The president is facing a handful of new polls that show him trailing Joe Biden substantially, including a Fox News poll where he's down by 12 points. And the rally caps a week where the president suffered a series of setbacks. There's the rollout of former National Security Advisor John Bolton's new book.
I don't think he's fit for office. I don't think he has the competence to carry out the job. There really isn't any guiding principle that I was able to discern other than what's good for Donald Trump's reelection.
The president called the Bolton book a compilation of lies and made-up stories, then insisted it is full of classified information.
You should go to jail for that for many, many years.
Mr. Bolton is the fourth top former administration official to question the president's fitness for office. The president has called John Bolton a wacko, Jim Mattis overrated, Rex Tillerson dumb as a rock, and John Kelly way over his head.
Why do you keep hiring people that you believe are wackos and liars?
Then there are the twin defeats in the Supreme Court on DACA and on protecting LGBTQ employees from being fired because of their sexual orientation. Mr. Trump tweeted on Thursday, "Do you get the impression that the Supreme Court doesn't like me?"
It's almost like we're a minority court.
And then there's the late-night Friday firing of the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. Jeffrey Berman was investigating a number of the president's associates.
That's all up to the Attorney General. Attorney General Barr is working on that. That's his department, not my department.
I'm going to talk to Acting Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf and to epidemiologist Michael Osterholm in just a moment. But I want to bring in our NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams to talk about.
So I do have a clip of Chad Wolf coming up, and I have a still image of Michael from the Michael Osterholm interview I wanted to show you. But first, regarding that NBC News Meet the Press news summary, first I love the way they highlight, why do you keep hiring people who are wackos and liars? I love the way they highlight, and, Trump never answered that question. And, I mentioned the 4 areas of Trump fail I was going to cover. You saw in that news summary, they covered all those and a couple others, like the John Bolton book. And, if you look behind me here, I have a whole bunch of books, and I'm not going to be buying the John Bolton book because I'm not sure if the money's going to go to John Bolton, but I don't want to contribute to that at all. I think I've noticed some PDF versions of the book floating around the internet. I might look at one of those, but it just doesn't really tell us anything we didn't know back during impeachment. It just gives us more detail and more examples of what we knew about Trump, and I don't want to do anything to promote or support John Bolton, and I think it's possible, based on not going through the full review process and some of the other things this judge said, that the proceeds of this book might not even go to John Bolton. They might end up being taken by the federal government. And given how long the case is going to take, I was thinking, maybe the profits from John Bolton's book will actually go to the federal government run by President Joe Biden. That might be some karma there. But anyway, I'm not really going to cover the whole John Bolton thing, but I wanted to mention that was in there. And then this whole firing of the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York, Jeffrey Berman. I'm not sure what that's about. There seems to be there might be some nefarious things going on there, but that requires more investigation as to whether that was why that happened, and whether it was some weird, he tried to put the head of the SEC and the SDNY, and that's just too many letters for me to go off on that tangent. But anyway, I wanted to highlight those two parts, those Trump failures that were also put into that news summary there. But regarding the Trump fail on the Tulsa rally, you saw some clips there from NBC News' Meet the Press. I thought Jake Tapper here, who also has like the cross-examination of the week, that's my first newsmaker clip 6, if you're following along on the clip list, with Peter Navarro, one of the two title newsmakers. I put them in the title of the video. Peter Navarro and Chad Wolf. You might call them Peter and the Wolf. I don't know. But you'll see Jake Tapper does a great cross-examination of Peter Navarro later. This is Jake Tapper's summary of some of the same things you saw in clips on NBC News' Meet the Press from the Tulsa rally of Trump. But I actually kind of like the way that Jake Tapper, instead of showing clips of Trump at the rally, summarizes some of the ridiculous, dishonest things he said at that rally. And by the way, I watched the whole thing. Some people are saying it's like 90 minutes. I think it was more like 104 minutes. I think it was an hour and 44 minutes. That I might be off by a couple minutes, but I watched the entire Trump speech, and it was pretty horrible. And you'll see it described in a much quicker way. Before I should get to the Jake Tapper news summary here, I did say I wanted to show this Michael Osterholm still image that Chuck Todd used in his interview with Michael Osterholm, the epidemiologist. And I don't know why this didn't make it into this is my one criticism of the NBC News Meet the Press news summary. They should have shown this still image. This is one of the most telling images regarding Trump and the United States' response to coronavirus versus the EU, which, there are like 500 million people in the EU. It's a little bit bigger, but I mean, look at those curves. All those people who are worrying about a second wave, we're still in the first wave. I think that is the graph they should have shown much closer to the beginning of Meet the Press and in that news summary. But anyway, I kind of pre-introduced the Jake Tapper news summary here. The State of the Union this week, of course, is remembering, you'll see the State of the Union, and I'll talk about the news summary that I've over-introduced already, and Sandy's whining over there, and I'll figure out why while we watch. Oh, and also thanks to Matthew for that Super Chat contribution. All my videos, my Sunday live clip roundups are getting demonetized because I guess the topics are too sensitive, so I basically only get any sort of remuneration for all the 8 to 10 hours I put in of work every Sunday, giving you this live clip roundup. Comes from Super Chat contributions like the one from Matthew, my patrons on Patreon, down a link in the video description, also direct contributions from PayPal, and also you can press that join button on YouTube and become a YouTube member. But anyway, I think I've waited way too long to show this CNN State of the Union news summary from Jake Tapper, where the State of the Union this week is...
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is remembering that there's a presidential election in less than 5 months. He's hoping to be back in his comfort zone this weekend, holding his first campaign rally in months, Saturday night in the city of Tulsa in Ruby Red, Oklahoma. But the event was riddled with missteps, a much smaller than expected crowd, and news early Saturday that 6 members of the Trump campaign advance team had tested positive for COVID-19. Instead of a speech of unity and hope, President Trump gave what critics described as a meandering speech filled with complaints and falsehoods. He spent about 14 minutes talking about West Point and defending his wobbly walk down that ramp. The president also made no mention of George Floyd or Juneteenth or the massacre of Black Americans in Tulsa 99 years ago this month, as many on his team had hoped he would. The president also seemed to minimize the threat of the coronavirus. He used the racist term Kung Flu to describe it. That's a term his own advisor, Kellyanne Conway, called highly offensive back in March. And at a time when several states are experiencing increased cases of COVID-19 and increased hospitalizations, the president said this about testing.
When you do testing to that extent, you're going to find more people, you're going to find more cases. So I said to my people, slow the testing down, please.
A White House official later said that the president was, quote, obviously kidding. Just a reminder, there are currently more than 2 million cases of COVID-19 in the United States and more than 119,000 dead in the United States. That's more than the total number of Americans who died in World War I. Sources tell CNN that the president was also upset to see so much news on Saturday focused not on his return to the campaign trail, but on his administration's ham-handed move to fire the widely respected and independent U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Geoffrey Berman, whose office is currently investigating Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani. A standoff between Attorney General Bill Barr and Berman ended when the president stepped in and fired Berman. Berman's deputy will now temporarily fill the role rather than the administration's pick, who had been announced on Friday. I want to start right there with the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee and congressman from New York.
And I have no Democrats this week. I don't have a Jerry Nadler clip. Adam Schiff was on one of the shows. He was talking about the John Bolton book and other stuff and about the Geoffrey Berman thing. I don't have those clips. If you want to see those clips, you can go down to the links in the video description to the full programs. But like I said before, the Geoffrey Berman thing is like, I don't know what's behind that. I think that is still developing. When I have something more to say about it, I will talk about I mean, it could be that the Southern District of New York is preparing to prosecute Donald Trump when he leaves office in January 2021. I could speculate about all sorts of things, but that's what I don't really want to do. That's why I'm not really covering that topic, but I like that Jake Tapper news summary, especially didn't use clips of Trump, instead talked about all the ridiculous things he said about, how he first said he told his people to slow down testing, and you'll see him at Jake Tapper asked Peter Navarro in my first Newsmaker clip, clip number 6, if you're following along on the clip list here. But he said that, we have to, State of the Union is remembering it's just 5 months to a presidential election. And he talked about Trump's missteps and the whole COVID situation and his meandering speech. Also talked about he spent like 15 minutes talking about his West Point speech and all the time he spent saluting and walking down the ramp and drinking the water. And he had this triumphant moment where he drank a glass of water with one hand and then threw it to the side like the macho man he is. Or like I said, I watched the whole thing, and I think it was pretty well captured by Jake Tapper in that news summary. The next news summary I want to show you is even shorter. This is ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where the guest host this week is the ABC's chief White House correspondent, Jonathan Karl. So he's at the White House press conferences, so he knows how crazy Trump really is. And he talks about COVID and the campaign, and how the campaign and COVID and the whole racial protest situation is all converging in the rally in Tulsa last night, and more things that I will talk about with you after we watch this 97-second news summary from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos this morning over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. The campaign trail, coronavirus, and calls for racial equality all converged last night in Tulsa. The president was hoping to reboot his campaign, but while the hype was huge, he claimed 1 million people asked for tickets. The crowd was modest. Lots of empty seats, a rarity for a Trump rally. And while there were some tense moments in Tulsa, protests remained largely peaceful. In a speech that lasted nearly 2 hours, the president slammed Joe Biden, defended his handling of coronavirus, saying he requested to slow down the testing to avoid finding more cases. And he spoke at length about his slow walk down a ramp at West Point. What the president did not do is mention Juneteenth, the Tulsa race massacre of 1921, or George Floyd, amid a national outcry for change. We will have more on the president's rally and the demands for racial justice. But first, the fallout from the president's firing of federal prosecutor Jeffrey Berman, the man who until yesterday was overseeing an investigation into the president's personal attorney. It was an extraordinary move, and now the president is saying it was all the attorney general's idea.
Why did you fire Jeffrey Berman, Mr. President? Why did you fire him?
It's all up to the Attorney General. Attorney General Barr is working on that. That's his department, not my department. That's really up to him. I'm not involved.
Let's take this all to our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas, and our Chief Legal Analyst, Dave.
And they had some pretty good coverage of the Jeffrey Berman situation for a situation where there aren't a lot of facts. And there's going to be a hearing on Wednesday, and Jeffrey Berman may or may not be there, but even if he is there, he may not talk about ongoing investigations. And like I said, it's going to take us a long time to figure out what that's all about, but it could be something big and juicy. I just don't think we have the facts yet to talk much about it. Now, the next two news summaries, I think, are a little bit more pro-Trump. First is CBS News' Face the Nation, which sometimes I've called Fox News Light. I don't know why. They kind of have a semi-right-wing spin on things, but there's actually some good journalism here. Margaret Brennan, the host, doesn't say much at all in this news summary, just turns it over to Mark Strassman, who's reporting on Tulsa from Atlanta for some reason. I can never figure out why they do that, but does a good job of pointing out a lot of the Trump fails you heard about in the last three news summaries. There's one thing that you'll hear in this news summary and in the Fox News Sunday news summary. I don't know why they say this. Why they say that the Bach Center, it's the Bank of Oklahoma Center where where Trump held his rally in Tulsa last night. They say it was perhaps a third empty. But if you actually look at what the fire marshal estimated as the crowd size, he said a little bit under 6,200 people. And if you look at the capacity of the Bach Center in Tulsa, it's 19,199. So under 6,200 versus 19,199, that's like a third full, not a third empty. I don't know if this is like one of those optimist-pessimist things where I see the stadium a third full and you see it a third empty, but no, that would be half and half. That would make sense, but no, I think it might be because there's a whole floor area and they were just like looking at how many seats were empty and not considering all the people in the floor area who where that was empty. I don't know, but anyway, you'll hear that. Otherwise, I think both of these news summaries, both Face the Nation and Fox News Sunday, did a pretty good job of, didn't show all the Trump fails you heard about in, Face the Nation shows most of the Trump fails. Fox News Sunday, not so much, but I'll start with Face the Nation and talk to you about it a little bit more after you watch a brief introduction from Margaret Brennan, going to their reporter Mark Strassman reporting on Tulsa from Atlanta for some reason over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. We've got a lot of news to get to today. We begin with CBS News' national correspondent Mark Strassman in Atlanta.
In Trump-friendly Oklahoma, the president reportedly seethed. His first re-election rally in months, and yet this Tulsa arena was perhaps one-third empty. He had crowed that 1 million people wanted tickets. Mr. Trump talked about America's continuing corona crisis.
Testing is a double-edged sword. When you do testing to that extent, you're going to find more people, you're going to find more cases. So I said to my people, slow the testing down, please.
He also characterized the pandemic with racist wordplay.
I can name Kung Flu. I can name 19 different versions of names.
Local health officials had worried the rally could become a COVID super spreader. Some Trump loyalists were willing to take the chance.
I am concerned about it, especially with all the spit maybe going up in the air as we cheer and stuff like that.
Before the event began, 6 members of the Trump campaign staff tested positive. All rally-goers had their temperatures checked. everyone received a face mask, but wearing it was optional.
No intentions on wearing masks. We're healthy individuals.
Inside, social distancing was ignored, and as the president spoke, it appeared most of his audience was not wearing masks. That attitude alarms U.S. health officials. As America reopens, COVID-19's resurging. Roughly 30,000 more Americans tested positive the last 2 days, close to the April peak. In 21 states, new COVID cases trend in a worrisome direction, up. 10 states this week broke 7-day averages for new cases. On Saturday, Florida broke its daily record again, more than 4,000 new cases. In and about face, state health officials now urge Floridians to wear masks and avoid groups of more than 50 people. When New York Governor Andrew Cuomo said he might start quarantining arriving Floridians, Florida's governor fired right back at Cuomo.
Just please do not quarantine any Floridians in the nursing homes in New York.
In both Arizona and Florida, Major League Baseball closed all spring training facilities. At least a dozen players have tested positive. The Mets and the Yankees are heading home to train where it's safer, in New York. Pro football took another hit. The NFL Players Association advised its members to stop practicing together. America is COVID weary. We're eager to get back to work. We want life to feel normal again. And it's making us sick.
Here in Georgia, COVID's setting the kind of records that no state wants. In per capita COVID deaths, America's top 4 counties are all here. Like much of America, in this phase of the virus, cities seem healthier. All 4 of those counties are rural. Margaret?
Mark Strassman in Atlanta. Thanks. We want to go now to the acting Homeland Security Secretary, Chad Wolf. He joins us.
Like I said, I will have a couple Chad Wolf clips coming up. Did you see Mark Strassman there at the end trying to justify the fact that he's reporting from Atlanta, where I guess the 4 top counties for COVID spread are, and they're rural counties. And that's the thing. You may remember a couple months back, I showed this Morgan Stanley prediction of how there was going to be like the coastal peaks and then the rural peaks of COVID in the United States. And I don't know if the timing ended up exactly right, but the one thing that I wish they had shown there, just like I wish they'd shown in the NBC News Meet the Press news summary, was this important graph. Like, should we be worrying about a second wave when we are obviously still in the first wave and maybe even coming up to a new peak, especially compared to what's going on in the European Union? That's the one. I thought that Face of the Nation news summary did a good job of talking about COVID-19, and they talked about Trump's rally in Tulsa and some of the fails involved there. The one thing that I think you heard in the Face of the Nation news summary that you won't hear in the Fox News Sunday news summary, well, there are a lot of things you won't hear in the Fox News summary. I don't think they mentioned super spreader, that the possibility of being a super spreader event. And I think they talk like some people have masks and some people don't. I may be misremembering, but I think Fox News is going to say some people have, some people don't. Not very few people had masks. And you may remember when I was covering the post-George Floyd protests, and I talked about watching all the video from Sacramento and all the protests, that actually I am a little worried about. I haven't gone out to any of the protests because I think that they might help spread COVID-19, and we're still in the middle of a pandemic. And I did criticize people, but they were like 90-95% wearing masks. And if you watched a couple weeks ago, I criticized people because, like, after 2 or 3 hours, a lot of those masks started to slip, but at least that was outside. And what happened in Tulsa was much worse, and that's not really covered, I don't think, in this Fox News Sunday news summary, that otherwise is pretty good, except it says the same thing they said on Face of the Nation about the third empty stadium that was really only a third full, that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that final news summary together over here.
Hello again, and happy Father's Day from Fox News in Washington. President Trump is back holding rallies for the first time since the coronavirus pandemic gripped our nation, and how the world and the race for the White House have changed in the last few months. Joe Biden has become the presumptive Democratic nominee for president. The virus has claimed the lives of at least 120,000 Americans, as well as millions of jobs. And the country's underlying racial divisions have boiled over into protests and riots. We'll drill down on all of that this hour. But first, Mark Meredith with the latest from Tulsa, a coronavirus hotspot where Trump supporters gathered last night.
Thank you, Oklahoma.
President Trump's first campaign rally in more than 3 months brought out thousands of supporters, but far fewer than expected. Some wore masks, while most shrugged off concerns about catching coronavirus.
No justice, no peace.
Before the rally, Black Lives Matter demonstrators came face to face with Trump supporters in Tulsa streets. But overall, the situation remained relatively calm. And campaign organizers canceled an appearance by the president at an outdoor overflow venue because of sparse attendance. Inside the Bank of Oklahoma Center, supporters filled about 2/3 of the arena, with many empty seats in the upper deck. The president telling them coronavirus testing was making his record look bad.
So I said to my people, slow the testing down, please. They test and they test.
The president even suggested lawmakers punish people who burn the flag.
We ought to come up with legislation that if you burn the American flag, you go to jail for 1 year. 1 year.
But with the November election fast approaching, the president focused heavily on attacking Joe Biden.
Joe Biden has surrendered to his party and to the left-wing mob. He has no control.
Saturday's rally may be a preview of what lies ahead later on this summer. The Trump campaign insists more rallies are in the works, even as a number of states are dealing with an increase in coronavirus cases. Chris?
Mark Meredith reporting from Tulsa. Mark, thank you. And joining us now from Baltimore, Dr. Tom.
And that's Dr. Tom Inglesby from the Johns Hopkins Center. He has a long title that I can never remember because it's like 12 words long, from like some school at the Johns Hopkins University. And anyway, I criticized Fox News Sunday in their news summary for not really talking about the Tulsa rally as being a super spreader event, but Chris Wallace actually did get that information out of Tom Inglesby in the subsequent interview right there that I didn't take any clips from. But I still think that Mark Meredith news summary, I mean, sometimes I think Fox News is trying to pivot for the post-Trump era, and they've been a little more critical of Trump. And of course, Trump has been a lot more critical of Fox News whenever they say anything that contradicts him in any way. But there was still, I thought that they were still sort of being a vehicle to get the red meat to Trump's base from Trump, even as they slightly criticized him in that news summary for the sparse crowd at the Tulsa rally. But they also showed him saying, let's send people to jail for a year for burning the American flag, which of course is already unconstitutional according to the Supreme Court, to punish people for burning an American flag they own. You can't do that. That's free speech. And they also showed the attacks on Biden, that it was much, in some ways it seemed like even when they were trying to report the news, they were, showing what Trump wanted his base to see in their news summary of what Trump said. But anyway, that's my final news summary. And before I get to the newsmaker clips, I noticed along the way that after I mentioned that one super chat contribution from Matthew, I got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more super chat contributions. So thanks to Rum Did It and Nelson 100 and John Porter and Lulu Girl and Sexy Bob. And some of those are regular contributors. I appreciate all those super chat contributions along the way during the news summaries. And now I'm going to move to the newsmakers. I have these kind of grouped according to the Trump fails. I talked about this first group is on COVID-19. This is the clip of the week I talked about earlier. Jake Tapper's very good cross-examination of Peter Navarro, this senior or this Trump advisor. Actually, he's like a trade advisor, but he's also been working on COVID-19. And this actually started off as like a 10.5-minute clip, and I edited it down to like 7 minutes. But it's first Jake Tapper cross-examining Peter Navarro on this idea that, oh, when Trump said, I told my, testing makes me look bad, so I told my people to slow down the testing. That was just a joke, because I'm joking about 120,000 dead Americans. If he was joking, even that is pretty awful, pretty horrific to be joking about a pandemic that kills almost 120,000 people as of today, and probably we're going to like 200,000 by the election. Like I said, I'm wearing pandemic peach because I think pandemic is not out of the news. It's not going away. And anyway, Jake Tapper cross-examines Peter Navarro on the whole joking about slowing down the testing. And then also Peter Navarro makes this news about how he seems to think that China created COVID-19. They created the virus, which you'll see if you watch carefully. That's what he says. But then he sort of walks it back to spawned. And like I said, I had to edit this down because Peter Navarro keeps trying to change the subject. And then there's this weird 2-minute gap from when Peter Navarro says that China created the virus to when Jake Tapper follows up. And it makes me think like one of his producers talks to him in his ear and says, hey, he said China created the virus. You got to ask him about that before you let him go. And anyway, I'll talk about all of that a little more after we watch this 7-minute, 5-second clip that I edited down from 10.5 minutes. But it's still the clip of the week, the best cross-examination of any of the Trump administration representatives. And 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 of the next 5 clips are Trump administration representatives. Then I'll end with Senator Tim Scott, also a Republican. But anyway, here's Jake Tapper cross-examining Peter Navarro about Trump's joke that he's slowing down testing and then whether China created the virus over here.
Welcome back to State of the Union. I'm Jake Tapper. President Trump returned to the campaign trail last night for the first time since the coronavirus pandemic began, but it did not quite feel like old times. And the troubles facing the nation followed the president into the arena in many ways. Joining me now, White House trade advisor Peter Navarro. Mr. Navarro, thanks so much for joining us. I want to start on what the president said about coronavirus testing at his rally last night, which alarmed quite a few health experts. Take a listen.
When you do testing to that extent, you're going to find more people, you're going to find more cases. So I said to my people, slow the testing down, please.
Come on now, Jake. You know it was tongue-in-cheek.
Did the president?
Come on now. That was tongue-in-cheek. Please.
I don't know that it was tongue-in-cheek at all.
I know it was
tongue-in-cheek.
He has
said similar things for months.
Tongue-in-cheek.
He has said similar things for months.
But you know what? We got.
But he has said similar things for months. That
over 30 million people unemployed, and we've seen over 100,000 people die because of the China Wuhan virus. Let's talk about some serious issues, Jake. I don't want to go there. I think there's some really important things. I'll break a little news for you.
I think testing is a very serious issue. I'm not the one making jokes about it. You're the one that said the president
it was a light moment.
The president was being tongue-in-cheek.
All right, we're 60 seconds into a tongue-in-cheek thing. Ask and answer it. I think what's important going on in this world today are things like John Bolton publishing a book. Here's the breaking news for you. I read the judge's decision on that, and
we'll get to Bolton in a second.
Sure, but I want to say this:
I do want to
highly classified information in that book, and that guy should be turning in a seersucker suit.
I'm going to get to Bolton in a second. But I still want to talk about the pandemic for a second. Fine, you think it's tongue-in-cheek? I'm saying
was a light
120,000 almost Americans are dead.
That was a light moment for him in a rally.
Okay. I'm not sure that a deadly pandemic where almost 120,000 Americans are really a good subject for a light moment.
Absolutely seriously. But anyway,
let me ask you a question, sir.
It's not my lane. It's not my lane.
I know, but it's not.
I mean, I can wax eloquent on all sorts of questions.
You wrote a memo. No,
Sure. Go ahead.
Well, you wrote a memo on February 23rd warning the administration, and I give you credit for this, warning the administration to take this more seriously. You're one of the few administration officials in the White House who took this pandemic threat as seriously as it should have been. You warned as many as 2 million people could die if serious steps were not taken. The president, on that same day, said, quote, "We have it very much under control in this country." Just this week, President Trump said it's fading away. It's not fading away. Well, so that's why I'm asking you about it. You have actually been a voice of reason on this inside the White House.
Sure, and I can tell you, for example, 2 weeks ago, I went with the president to Guilford, Maine, where we stood up a factory there, which is providing the swabs we need for testing, which we are ramping up dramatically. And I can assure you, as I work across the street in my office, we are filling the stockpile in anticipation of a possible problem in the fall. We're doing everything we can beneath the surface, working as hard as we possibly can. And so that's my role in this. And to the extent that it does create jobs, that's a good thing. But this is a serious issue. But look, last night was a campaign rally.
You're preparing for a second wave in the fall.
Of course
we're preparing for a second wave in the fall.
You prepare for what can possibly happen. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but of course you prepare. And I'll tell you what, we're a lot more prepared under this president than we were when China foisted this on us to begin with. And let's not forget that, Jake. China created this pandemic. They hid the virus, they created that virus, and they sent over hundreds of thousands of Chinese citizens here to spread that around and around the world. Whether they did that on purpose, that's an open question, but that's a fact. And so my role here, Jake, my role here at the White House is to help this president create jobs. And we are facing probably the worst economic crisis we've faced in our history. And this president in 3.5 years did a beautiful job.
Let's talk about the economy.
Go for it.
Let's talk about the economy. I just want to ask about something you said. Did you say China created this virus? Did I hear you wrong?
You did not hear me wrong. That virus was a product of the Chinese Communist Party. And until we get some information about what happened in those labs or what happened in that wet market, we know that virus was spawned in China. That is what I mean. Spawned in China.
But you think it was purposefully created?
Yeah, that's an open question. But I'll tell you this: in 2006, in a book I wrote called "The Coming China Wars,"
evidence of that?
On page 150, I predicted that China would create a viral pandemic that could possibly kill millions. Why did I do that at the time? Because the whole structure of that authoritarian, repressive, non-transparent society is geared towards giving us exactly what they've given us, which is a pandemic. I would love to know. So I would love to know. Hang on, Jake. You should be asking this question. You should be asking this question every day to the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, if President Xi gave me an interview,
when did you know
President Xi gave me an interview, I'd love to.
Yeah, well, but that doesn't prevent you from asking
I'm not going to defend the Chinese.
Go ahead.
I have been asking about the Chinese, and we did a whole special on the pandemic, and we have been very critical of the Chinese government for how it handled it. Now, we've never said that they created this purposely.
Well, that's an open question. I did not say that. Roll the tape back. What I said was that virus came out of China. The Chinese Communist Party is responsible for it. And as far as I'm concerned, well, spawned. Let us say spawned, and it's an open question as to how that happened. Okay, but in terms of the code of justice, I'm a Napoleonic code of justice for the Chinese Communist Party. They are guilty until proven innocent because of what we know, Jake. They spawned the virus in China. They hid it for 2 months, and they killed over 100,000 Americans. And the beat goes on. And the question is, I mean, why aren't they responsible for the trillions of dollars of damage that they've inflicted on this? But look, it's Sunday morning. I think I'm
not going to defend the Chinese government. I would like to see. Let's talk about it. I'm not defending the Chinese government. I'd love to see evidence for the allegation you seem to be suggesting is possible that they created this on purpose.
Maybe they'll give it to us. I said spawn the virus.
I'm sure the Chinese will hand it right over to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, let's
turn to the Bolton book.
And then they turned to the Bolton book, and like I said, I edited out some parts of that clip there because it was 10.5 minutes long. I got it down to about 7 minutes where you both see Jake Tapper doing a great cross-examination on the idea that Trump was joking when he said we should slow down the testing. Testing makes me look bad. And Trump's, like Jake Tapper said, and he said later in the program, Trump has said that several times. Remember, like when the cruise ship was coming in, he said, I don't want the cruise ship passengers to come into the United States because they're going to make my numbers look bad. I mean, it's all like a PR problem for Trump. So Jake Tapper did a good job on that. There was a weird... I did one edit there where Jake Tapper listened to Peter Navarro say that China created the virus and never followed up on it, and then 2 minutes later said, by the way, I want to follow up on what you said like 2 minutes ago. Was that like a producer talking in his ear? Possibly, which, you know, it's a good thing that there's more than one. You know, it's tough to interview someone and listen and get ready for your next question, and so it's a good thing they have multiple people working. If that was a producer talking in Jake Tapper's ear, I hope it was, or that's the only real explanation for why he would do that like 2 minutes later. And Peter Navarro did actually a pretty good job of trying to change the subject, and I think, anyway, there were some parts of that Jake Tapper didn't even really get to, about blaming China, and in some ways I think it was all a diversion tactic by Peter Navarro, because when he said China created the virus, he also said, but whether it's intentional or not, that remains to be seen. So it's kind of like he did a Trump, where you like say something really provocative, but like contradict yourself within the next 30 to 60 seconds or whatever, because Trump is always on like all sides of an issue while saying things that are like totally ridiculous, but also tempering them by saying things that contradict what he said 30 seconds ago. It's like, it's the Trump way, because rationality has gone totally out the window in the Trump presidency, the Trump Republican Party. And anyway, I think Peter Navarro is a great example of that, just like how you use talking points to avoid actually talking about facts. But that was the two people I put in the title of my Sunday live clip roundup are Peter Navarro and Chad Wolf. Peter and the Wolf, as I said earlier, but the next two clips are the Wolf part of Peter and the Wolf. This is Chad Wolf, the acting Secretary of Homeland Security, because of course Trump loves to put people into jobs without getting them confirmed by the Senate, so they just like act like they're being able to do their jobs. And just like Peter Navarro, I think, rolled out a lot of the blame China talking points that if you watch Trump's rally speech, he also pivoted to, never should have happened because China lied to us and it came from China and we blame China and it's the Kung flu. You saw that in some of the news summaries. Well, here you'll see Chad Wolf, the acting director or acting secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, blaming Mexicans. That's right, blaming Mexicans, even though the United States is like the #1 nation for cases. We have like 25% of the world's cases, even though we have like 4% of the population. If anything, like Mexicans should be worried about American or U.S. people going to Mexico to spread the virus. But you'll see Chad Wolf talking to Margaret Brennan, and she kind of teases this out, although she doesn't follow up on the Supreme Court DACA issue that came right before this clip, and that's what I'm going to talk about when I show the Chuck Todd NBC News Meet the Press question to Chad Wolf. But first, here is Chad Wolf blaming coronavirus cases in the Southwest on Mexicans. So that's like another Trumpian talking point that we can look forward to, that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
One would assume. Just to button up on something you referred to earlier when you talked about the increase in testing that is available to those who may have COVID-19. I'm sure you know that there are spikes in actual hospitalizations, people actually getting sick, particularly in Arizona and in Texas. It's not just increased testing.
Absolutely. And again, the White House Coronavirus Task Force is on top of all of these outbreaks, looking state by state, county by county, whether it's Arizona, Texas, Florida, a number of these states that are having hotspots, that are having those upticks. So we're surging resources, medical individuals and the like, even individuals from the Department of Homeland Security. We're surging into those areas to understand what is the cause of that outbreak and address that proactively.
And you don't know yet what the cause of the outbreaks in all of those Sunbelt states is?
They're all different. They're all for various different reasons. What we see is some of the outbreaks along the southwest border in Arizona, particular parts of Texas. We have about 1.5 U.S. citizens and legal permanent residents living in Mexico coming back over for medical treatment. So there's a variety of different reasons on why you would have different outbreaks in different states. And again, we have medical professionals. CDC has sent teams into these individual areas. The department has as well, and we're continuing to address that.
All right. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your time this morning.
Okay. Thank you.
We'll be right.
So, yeah, that was the Secretary of the Department of, or Acting Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf, blaming Mexicans for spreading COVID-19 to Arizona and Texas. It seems probably more than likely that it goes the other way, in my opinion, but you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. Now, before that clip, Margaret Brennan actually asked Chad Wolf about something that Chuck Todd asked Chad Wolf about in this next clip, which is one of the fails I talked about at the beginning in terms of what my topic is this week in terms of Trump fails, and I think I said the words in terms too many times there, but one of Trump's big fails this week was at the Supreme Court, where he lost two big cases. One on DACA, which is deferred action for childhood arrivals. That's what some people call dreamers, kids who were brought here by their parents illegally through no fault of their own, and then they grow up as United States citizens, they think maybe, or they grow up as kids in the United States, and in order to qualify for the DACA program, deferred action means we're not going to deport you. We're going to defer our action on deporting you for if you arrived as a child. DACA, right? And anyway, there was this case decided by the Supreme Court this week where instead of DACA there was a DREAM Act that was going to make all these kids citizens, and it languished in the Congress for many years, and Obama tried to get it passed. He couldn't get it passed. They almost got comprehensive immigration reform passed in the Obama administration. It passed the Senate with 68 votes, and then the Republican Speaker of the House, John Boehner, wouldn't even bring it up for a vote in the House of Representatives. So eventually Obama just gave up on legislation, and he decided to create this executive order saying these 800,000 people who were brought here as kids and grew up as Americans, we are not going to deport those people. We are going to give them work permits. We're going to defer action on them and give them legal status. And Obama wasn't the first president to do that. Bush did that. Reagan did that. And whether it's legal or not, that is sort of an open question. The Supreme Court didn't decide that. What they decided was, and sometimes people ask me, can't you say anything nice about Donald Trump? Can't you say anything nice about him? And there actually is one thing nice I can say about President Donald Trump. And the thing that I really appreciate about our president, Donald Trump, is that he is so incompetent as a president that many of his evil plans never come to fruition because he is too incompetent to get them done. So I really appreciate how incompetent he is, because he's really bad at bringing his evil plans to fruition. And instead of like going through the executive order process and rescinding the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival program that Obama put into place, instead he had Jeff Sessions, his attorney general, just say, DACA is illegal, so we're not going to do that anymore. And of course they sued, and it violated the Administrative Procedures Act. When people are depending on some government program, you can't just take it away without going through a process. And so basically Trump could have gotten rid of DACA, except he was too dishonest and incompetent to do it the right way, and so he lost at the Supreme Court. But that's not what you're going to hear from Chad Wolf, the acting Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, in this next clip. He's going to say something to Chuck Todd that he also said to Margaret Brennan in a clip I didn't take from Face the Nation, but they both did a really bad job of cross-examining him on this, because in both interviews he says multiple times, DACA is illegal, and I just have to follow the law. I'm just a cabinet secretary in the Trump administration. I have to follow the law, and DACA is illegal. But that's not what the Supreme Court said. No Supreme Court has said that DACA is illegal. It probably is legal. What they said is that Trump was so stupid and dishonest he couldn't even undo an executive order that Obama did, even though he had the power to do it. And anyway, I will talk about all of that a little more after we watch the second, and there I've just committed some legal analysis on a Supreme Court decision. Maybe I'll talk about the LGBTQ decision after we watch this Chad Wolf clip from Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press this morning over here.
I want to ask quickly on DACA and the deferred action on those folks brought in to this country as children by their parents. The president described the decision as saying, hey, he actually won. It just means they have to fix the paperwork. Let me ask the question this way. For somebody that is participating in the DACA program, how concerned should they be that they might be asked to leave the country in the next 2 years?
Well, Chuck, what we know is the program is clearly unlawful, and I would point you back to the Supreme Court decision. At no point in that decision did they say that the program was lawful. They simply didn't like the rationale and the procedures that we used, and I find that a little troubling. What we know is the Obama administration created this program out of thin air. They haven't really been held to task on why they didn't put this out for public comment and notice. It's such a large decision and a program. Really, the American people needed to have some comment into that. What we've seen from this administration is we take a very logical approach to winding this down over a 6-month period, been very clear about that, and so we find ourselves where we're at today. The president's been very clear. We need to find a solution for this population, and we'll continue to look at that. We'll continue to look at the opinion that the court produced this week, making sure that we adhere to that, but we are going to end an unlawful program. As the acting Secretary of Homeland Security, I don't have the luxury to ignore the law. The program's unlawful. We need to solve it. The president's begging Congress, has been for the last 2.5 years, to solve this problem. We're willing to sit down at the table and negotiate with them.
So are you going to solve this administratively and follow sort of what the Supreme Court seemed to lay out about how you need to give more time and all of this, or does that mean the president has ruled out just ending this by executive order, which is another way he could have done it, he just chose not to?
No, I think we'll continue to encourage Congress to come to the table and find a solution for this population. The president's been very clear about that over 3.5 years. But at the same time, he's also directed the Department of Homeland Security to look at that opinion, look at the rationale, and look what the court has asked us to do. And that's what we're doing today. I'm not going to get ahead in front of the president. He's going to make that decision at the right time, but the department will be ready to make that call.
All right, Acting Secretary Chad Wolf of the Department of Homeland Security. I appreciate you coming on, sharing the administration's view.
Great,
and again,
thank you.
Happy Father's Day.
Well, he definitely shared the administration view, but Chuck Todd in that interview and then Margaret Brennan in the previous interview in a clip I didn't show, both talked to him about the DACA decision, let him get away with saying several times, that DACA was illegal. And his only evidence, you heard him say there, and he said it in the other interview, that, well, the Supreme Court didn't say it was not illegal, which is not the same thing as saying it was illegal. What they did say was what Donald Trump did was illegal. The way he got rid of DACA was illegal by just saying it was illegal. And anyway, I was disappointed in the corporate news anchors that, you know, they're not lawyers. I'm a lawyer, but they're not lawyers. But they have a big staff, including legal analysts. That's, you know, they're just mouthpieces for huge corporate organizations that should have done a better job of interviewing or of cross-examining Chad Wolf on the DACA is legal issue that you saw in that clip, and a clip I didn't show you from Face the Nation. Also, you know, Trump lost this other big case, the whether the Civil Rights Act made discrimination against gay and transgender people in the workplace illegal. It's a really interesting case that I said I would talk about briefly. It says in the Civil Rights Act that you can't discriminate against anyone in the workplace based on their sex, and that applies to like workplaces with 50 people or more. There are some exceptions and religious exceptions, and I don't want to go into all that stuff, but the word sex was actually added by people who oppose. It was like sex, race, national origin, religion, and they added sex to try to kill the bill. And so if you're trying to figure out what did the people mean who added that word, you have to, like, you know, for the legislative intent, you have to like recognize that the people who added the word sex actually didn't want the bill to pass. So probably the most expansive definition. And what that opinion on discrimination was written by Neil Gorsuch, Trump's first pick for the Supreme Court. And he's supposedly like a Scalia clone. And the thing is, he did a textual interpretation, because if you fire someone because they love a man and they're a man, but you don't fire someone because they love a man and they're a woman, you're firing them for their sex. That's what the word sex means, even though that's not necessarily what they might have meant back in the 1960s when they passed the law. That is what the word sex means, and it is sex discrimination. Also transgender, you know, for people who say they're, you know, they start dressing as a woman because that's their gender identification, and you fire them, but you don't do that to someone who was born biologically as a woman. That's sex discrimination. So just because Neil Gorsuch joined this opinion where there's a really good argument based just on the words of the statute, that doesn't mean that Neil Gorsuch is going to be a liberal. And there are there's like an abortion case coming up. There are Trump's financial record cases coming up. Who knows how the conservative justices are going to rule. I wouldn't necessarily take this week's big wins as a portent of things to come from a conservative Supreme Court. So I just wanted to put in that commentary before I move on to the last two clips on Trump's failed response to the post-George Floyd murder protests for police misconduct. Two clips on that, one from Mercedes Schlapp, a senior Trump campaign advisor, and then from the one black Republican senator, Tim Scott. But first, here's Mercedes Schlapp getting slapped around a little, I guess, by Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday. First, he kind of cross-examined her pretty heavily on the problems with the crowd attendance. Some people say it was TikTok that did this. I actually think that the crowd attendance, you know, since there was no limit to the number of people who could get tickets, the fact that only 6,000 people showed up in person, I think that may have more to do with fear of COVID-19 than the supposed teenage TikTok crank against Trump, but that isn't the clip I took of Mercedes Schlapp. This is talking about Trump's bad response to the post-George Floyd protests based on a poll that shows that Americans really don't like Trump in terms of his racism, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that penultimate newsmaker clip for tonight over here.
You know, it's a different. You're shifting. Joe Biden rally.
Mercedes, you're shifting to a campaign speech, which has nothing to do with the.
Oh, and one good thing that Chris Wallace does here, showing that he does have some journalist in him, as he both starts and ends this clip criticizing Mercedes Schlapp for going into campaign speech instead of answering the question. Anyway, and I will talk about that a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
You know, it's a different. You're shifting. Joe Biden rally.
Mercedes, you're shifting to a campaign speech, which has nothing to do with the attendance of the rally. Let's talk about the poll. Let's talk about the polls. And we did talk about the enthusiasm gap, Mercedes, with Simone. So now let me ask you about some issues in the polls. As we pointed out, the president is trailing Joe Biden in the latest Fox poll by 12 points. 50% to 38%. But I want to point to some things inside the poll, because I know one of the arguments is, well, that's just a national poll. If you look at swing states, Biden leads in 5 of them and is basically tied in the 6th, North Carolina. And one of the big reasons for the president's recent drop appears to be that 31% approve of his response to the protest after George Floyd's death and 56% disapprove. Mercedes, by wide margins, people in the Fox poll think that Joe Biden respects racial minorities and President Trump does not.
I don't know how that's even possible, because if you want to see the record of Joe Biden, it's one in which he proudly embraced segregationists. I mean, even his colleagues like Senator Kamala Harris basically accused him of being a racist. He's one who gave a eulogy at Senator Robert Byrd's funeral. I mean, we can go down the list. He did not provide any significant change for the black community. In fact, he supported mass incarceration when it came to supporting the 1994 crime bill. This is in complete contrast to President Trump, who has been focused on uplifting the black community. Just this week, he signed an executive order on the police reform, where in essence, he's ensuring that these police departments implement these best practices, and they get incentivized for this. And you know how he did it? He worked with both law enforcement and community leaders.
But let me ask you about the president's record when it comes to race. Let's take the case of Mary Elizabeth Taylor, who was an assistant secretary of state and one of the highest ranking African Americans in the Trump administration. She was a member of the administration until she quit this week, and she issued this statement that I want to put on the screen. The president's comments and actions surrounding racial injustice and black Americans cut sharply against my core values and convictions. Mercedes, this is a committed Republican saying she doesn't want to be part of the Trump administration.
Well, I wish that Mary Elizabeth would listen to the president's speech following the tragedy of George Floyd's death, where he said healing, not chaos, where he called for justice, where he brought in community leaders from the black community to speak with them, to listen to them. Just yesterday, I was with our coalition, our Black Voices Coalition, these men and women who stand with President Trump because of what he has done to help the black community. I'll give you an example. One angel mom, her son Brandon died, was killed by an illegal immigrant. And she said to me, she said, all black lives matter, but what about my son? Al Sharpton didn't show up, Jesse Jackson didn't show up, and guess what? When they went over to President Obama and Vice President Joe Biden, they did nothing. But when this angel mom, African-American, went to President Trump, he's the one
I've got to tell you, Mercedes, you've got to answer my questions and stop making campaign speeches. I want to ask you about John Bolton's new book, which a federal judge says that he... And
like I said, I'm not really covering the John Bolton book, but I think you should agree with me after watching that clip that Chris Wallace did sort of Schlapp around Mercedes Schlapp there, and especially on President Trump's response to the George Floyd protests, the poll numbers, and that whole incident with this high-profile black woman, Mary Elizabeth Taylor, resigning based on her principles from the Trump administration. And that's what starts this final news clip I'm going to show you. This is from This Week with George Stephanopoulos, Jonathan Karl talking to Senator Tim Scott, the only black Republican in the Senate, first asking about how someone he recommended, Mary Elizabeth Taylor, resigning for principles, and you'll see Tim Scott try to justify being a black Republican and working with Trump, and how he stood up after Charlottesville and stood up when he said, that the squad should go back to where they came from, and when he attacked Baltimore for, with all these racists, or, and he even says after because Trump made this misstep in Charlottesville, he got opportunity zones, which, I don't know, is that like a bargain with the devil? You tell me. Oh, Sandy's lying back down over there. And I do have a bonus Dash and Sandy clip from this morning after this last news clip, where my main criticism of Tim Scott that Jonathan Karl doesn't really cross-examine him on is he basically does the false equivalency that, there are some problems with race in the Democratic Party, so anything Trump does is just as bad as the Democrats. And I totally agree with some of Tim Scott's criticism of Democrats, of Joe Biden for the crime bill and various other problems with Democrats. Those were all valid criticisms, but it still doesn't make them equivalent to what Donald Trump is doing, and the reason that Mary Elizabeth Taylor resigned, that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch this final news clip together over here.
Local police departments. Right. This is local police. So let me ask you before you go about Mary Elizabeth Taylor, who was, of course, the former Assistant Secretary of State for Legislative Affairs, somebody who you supported getting that position. She has resigned, and in her letter of resignation, she writes, "The president's comments and actions surrounding racial injustice and black Americans cut sharply against my core values and convictions. I must follow the dictates of my conscience and resign." I want to ask you to comment on her resignation, because I know she's somebody you supported, but also when you've heard some of what the president has done just over the past couple of weeks, invoking the words of segregationists, saying that, taking credit for Juneteenth becoming something that people know about. When you hear his words, you see what he has done. Have you ever felt that way, that his actions cut sharply against your core values and convictions?
Well, I certainly have spoken out about the Charlottesville situation. He and I sat down after that, and that's how we got opportunity zones. I spoke out about the comments about the squad in Baltimore. So the president has said things that I have found offensive. I've spoken out against those things publicly, and I also called him. We had constructive conversations. Here's what I say. I think Mary Elizabeth is a wonderful person, brilliant. She has an incredibly bright future. She's following her convictions. I believe that my convictions have allowed me to work with the president on opportunity zones, on the highest funding for HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities in the history of the country, on permanent funding for those schools. I've been able to work with the president on the executive order so that we could make sure that more folks who are suspects get to go home if they were not stopped under appropriate manners and go to jail if necessary. We were able to sit there with the families of victims of police brutality and have a serious and civil conversation where the families left and they said themselves they were heard by this president. I'm not sure what their expectation was coming in. I know what their expectations were going out. And frankly, whether it's Dick Durbin with his use of token versus other comments made by the president, there is plenty of blame of race on both sides, that we need to be more sensitive on the issue of race in this nation. But in order for us to make progress, I think think it's kind of insincere or at least not authentic to suggest that one side has a bigger problem than the other, especially if you look at the 1994 crime bill that Cory Booker himself said to Joe Biden, this thing locked up a disproportionate share of African Americans, and then he worked with the President Trump, to get the first step taken care of. So we both are working, both sides of the aisle should be working for a more harmonious union called the great United States of America.
All right, on that note, thank you, Senator Scott. Appreciate you joining us.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Coming up in a...
So you see, Jonathan Karl, no follow-up on the false equivalency I talked about. I call it a false equivalency. Do you think the Democrats are just as bad as Donald Trump on the race issue? I'm not saying they're perfect. Like I said, I agree with a lot of things Tim Scott said there. But and then, what do you think about his whole deal with the devil? Like I'm in there. I get to talk to Trump. I got the opportunity zones as a guilt price for Charlottesville, or I don't know. Anyway, I talked about that before I showed the clip. I hope you appreciated all the clips I picked out for you this week. I appreciate all of you who joined me for the live show, especially I appreciate those who support my live stream financially with the Super Chat contributions during the week, during the show here. I think I thanked all those contributors earlier. I also appreciate the people who support me through Patreon at the link down in the video description monthly. That's something I can rely on. Also with the join button under the video, that's a monthly contribution I can rely on. And then probably the way to contribute with the least amount taken out by Patreon or YouTube is through the PayPal link down in the video description. And anyway, that's the way you can support me doing these live streams, at least for the rest of the year, as I've promised to do every Sunday. And I've done it for, this is LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup number 374. So that's over 7 years of Sundays. And if you like what I'm doing, those are the ways you can support me financially, or just with a thumbs up or a supportive comment. I appreciate all of those ways of supporting me as well. And I know that some of my viewers like the Dash and Sandy clips that I show, the so-called dandy clips. And this morning, while I was watching AM Joy on MSNBC, which you will hear in the background of the Dash and Sandy clip, that's, some people have accused me, there's this whole conspiracy theory. Are these really Dash and Sandy clips from the day of the show, or are these pre-recorded so that they can be used later? No. In the background of this Dash and Sandy clip, you will hear the MSNBC AM Joy show from this very morning. I start off focusing in on Sandy the dog, and I show how she just sits there while Dash comes in one door and goes out another. In the Dash and Sandy clip, I will finish the show with over here.
Leading MJ Hager, who is your opponent, leading you among Democrats 32-16. However, 44% remain undecided. How do you get them to decide your way, and how do you win in a state like Texas, which also has pretty significant voter suppression?
I want to say happy Father's Day and happy Pawpaw Day to all of you also. You know what Pawpaw means.
So that's your Dash and Sandy clips. Started off Sandy briefly, and then you saw Dash go in one door and out another, while AM Joy from this morning is like I'm a hostage holding up today's newspaper just to prove it to you. But anyway, that's the show. I've gone over time from what I wanted to do. I hope you appreciate the time and effort I put in this Sunday and every Sunday for the last 7 years plus of Sundays. And I will be back next week and every week for at least the rest of 2020 doing this show. And maybe I'll have some reason to put up some other video during the week, but if not, I guess I will see you next Sunday. And until then, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.